Please like, share and subscribe. Check out my books at cscooper.com.au and also consider donating to my Give Send Go for my planned USA book tour this October. I recently watched the trigonometry interview with Richard Dawkins. I'm not gonna lie, I never really got into this guy. Even during my atheist phase, I couldn't be bothered reading his books or watching his interviews. I already understood evolution just fine, and none of the arguments for the existence of God convinced me. Having said that, none of the arguments against the existence of God convinced me either. I eventually realised that being an atheist was making me act like a jackass, so I unsubscribed from all the podcasts and YouTube channels and just watched abridged anime parodies for a while. Now, after watching Jordan Peterson and Lotus Eaters, and perusing some parts of the Bible, I've started going back to church. I can't say I'm totally a believer, but I prefer church to anime conventions, that's for sure. The people I meet are a lot more wholesome than those roaming around in furry outfits or t-shirts that say, "I love anal." I've also considered something in the past year that I'll get into in a minute. In the Dawkins interview on trigonometry, he called religion a necessary lie. He railed against religion for years, but now all this woke quackery has become so mainstream and powerful, he's come to the realization that humans need some kind of religious belief in order to flourish. This is the something I just mentioned, but before I get into that, I'd like to critique this guy on the use of the word lie. A lie is an instance of an act, that being the willful stating of something that isn't true. In order to lie, you have to know what is true, as far as you know, and say something else. This happens all the time in the mainstream media, don't we all know?
A new report today has revealed that unions are costing our state governments billions of dollars.
Liar! I object to Dawkins calling religious belief a lie. When a priest offers you the Eucharist, he isn't saying something he knows isn't true. He genuinely believes it is the consecrated body of Christ. Exactly the same way, when you attend puja and the archaka leads you in meditation, he genuinely believes he is invoking a deity in your heart. There is no falsehood in the minds of the participants. When Dawkins debates a theist philosopher, the theist isn't lying. He genuinely believes in God and in his arguments. So when Dawkins calls religion a necessary lie, he's not dealing with religious people fairly. And in the next few years, he's going to come to the realization that all the theists he debated so hotly were right to be concerned about atheism and where it would lead. He's already partway there, as demonstrated in this interview. See, Dawkins is touching on something I'd figured out over the past few years. I don't know whether or not God exists, and the arguments for and against never convinced me. Seriously, even as an atheist, I was equally bored listening to the no arguments as I was for the yes. I don't think it's a falsehood or a truth because you can't prove it one way or another. You therefore can't say religious belief is true or false, and it can't be classified as a lie at all. Ironically, it's a massive falsehood to call religion a lie. But I can say, something I am absolutely certain about is the existence of the God-shaped hole. Here's why. FPGAs. This stands for Field Programmable Gate Array.
What the fuck are you talking about?
It's a type of computer chip. You can design an electrical circuit and then download the schematic onto this chip, and it will act as if you'd fabricated your circuit at a silicon factory. It's great for prototyping. In the 1990s, a guy wanted to find out if evolutionary algorithms could be used to design electric circuits. So he hooked an FPGA and a signal generator up to a computer. The computer then created 100 random circuits, downloaded them onto the FPGA one by one, and tested their ability to distinguish between a high tone and a low tone from the signal generator. If it was a high tone, the circuit had to output 0 volts. If it was low, 5 volts. The computer would then score each circuit based on how well they distinguished the tones. Now, the first generation was garbage, obviously, but some were slightly less garbage than others. The computer then took the top 10 scorers, deleted the rest, mixed and matched bits and pieces from the top scorers, added random mutations, and produced a new set of 100 circuit designs. The process repeated. It took weeks, but after tens of thousands of generations of incremental improvement, the program yielded a circuit that worked perfectly. Not only that, but it would function for hours, happily discriminating the tones. Then the guy looked under the hood. First thing he noticed was how efficient the circuit was, in terms of components used and power consumption. It was a tiny fraction of the resources used by a human designer. Then he looked at the schematic, and could not for the life of him figure out how it worked. There was a connection between input and output, but it took a long, zigzagging route, looped back on itself, parts branching out to nowhere, and some components were receiving power, but were not functionally connected to the main line. They seemed to do nothing. When he removed some of them, the circuit continued to work just fine. But others, when he removed them, the whole circuit stopped working. Now, this example is often used against creationists to explain how evolution can develop highly irreducibly complex systems that are far more efficient than human-designed systems. But this also provides an analogue of what I realised over the last few years, and what Dawkins is just cluing into. You see, there were certain seemingly do-nothing components that, when the researcher removed them, the circuit continued to work just fine. But over time, the circuit got less and less stable, until it fell apart and stopped working entirely. These components were in fact having a cumulative and corrective effect on the main path, which kept the solution stable over the long term. By removing them, sure, the researcher reduced the amount of energy and components consumed, but he sacrificed long-term stability. We see this effect in our recent secularly raised generations. I was raised religious, but I know people who weren't. I also know parents who say, we don't need to worry about religion. It's old-fashioned. We're too busy to go to church. So they don't take their kids. I knew a couple such kids, and they tended to say things like, "Oh, I'm bi, pan, demi, blah, whatever sexual." Or they would say, "I struggle so much with my identity, so I'm trans." And there was something about that that really bugged me. At first I thought it was homophobia, and yet I knew gay men in university who were perfectly nice guys, and I got along with them fine. I didn't have a problem with them at all. I know gay men and women now, and I don't have a problem with them at all. But when I see these people dressing up in flamboyant costumes and furry outfits, acting like absolute yahoos, I just cringe. That's when I realised they're not really any of these things at all. They're trying to fill a hole in their hearts. I think there is a fundamental part of our neurological machinery that has evolved to expect some kind of ritual upbringing. Going to church or mosque or temple or puja and carrying out the rituals therein provides certain inputs into your brain. Taking a pose regularly, engaging in ritualistic prayer, the smells and sights of religious practice, the thought patterns you engage in when you recite a prayer, are all sensory inputs that mold your neural connections and form your foundational experiences. I believe this hones your instincts, situates you in the world, and allows you to intuitively identify what is right and wrong, correct and incorrect. But if a kid doesn't get that, he or she will instinctively seek it out and end up finding something not good for them. It's like you're in a desert. You're dying of thirst. You see a water hole on the horizon and run for it, and you drink, drink, drink. But then one of four things can happen. 1. You found water and you survive. 2. You found water, but you drink so damn fast that you drown. 3. You found water, but it's a toxic bog and you die of poison. 4. It was a mirage and you drank sand. Every human has an instinctive need for transcendental meaning. I believe Carl Benjamin described it as a metaphysical narrative for one's life. These people who have embraced so much of this social deconstructionist nonsense, as alluded to by Dawkins, are starving for that metaphysical narrative. Dennis Prager puts it beautifully. They're affluent, secular, and bored. This is the God-shaped hole. We excised this seemingly do-nothing component from our cultural and psychological machinery, and our civilization is slowly falling into chaos. We need to get that back. We need to take our kids to church or wherever and raise them religious. Even if you're an atheist, do it anyway. And raise them in the religion of their ancestors. This is important. Going back to the evolved FPGA circuit, the researcher did another thing. He replaced the FPGA chip with a physically different chip of the same make and model. Yet, the evolved circuit wouldn't work on the new chip. It seems that the evolutionary algorithm, completely unintentionally, utilized the electromagnetic and quantum mechanical peculiarities of the silicon that made up the chip. No silicon chip is entirely identical, and there will be irregularities. So, through this random mutation and selection criteria, the circuit is utilizing phenomena that are completely outside the purview of a human engineer. Our brains are the same, on a far more majestic scale. There are billions of neurons in our brains, and their connectomes are dictated by our genes, which are diverse across humanity. But within certain races, I'd bet there are similar structures and neural patterns. And those patterns would be honed by certain rituals which have evolved alongside them. This is why social engineering ultimately fails. Just as the evolved circuit uses phenomena beyond the comprehension of a human engineer, so too does a culture that evolved alongside the humans who practice it. A top-down, logically engineered culture can never replace that which humans developed through trial and error and inheritance of values. It is also why you should raise your children in the religion of your ancestors. Your brains evolved to expect those rituals. The rituals that led to communities flourishing, just like the physical characteristics that lead to a population's success, were selected for. Therefore, you need to provide that ritual.
History matters. To a very large extent, we're historical beings. To understand ourselves, we need to understand our society and our history.
You may not understand how or why it works, but it's clear they do work. And it may not ever be clear why it works. This is what I think Christians refer to as the mystery of faith.
How it is with people. Nobody cares how it works as long as it works.
These work better when you strip off the Duranite caps. Don't ask me why, they just do.
Nevertheless, we can see in the state of our culture, those who are raised in their religion are grounded in their heritage. They understand where they are placed in the world and are better equipped to see the pitfalls and dangers around them. Maybe it's good that we had the atheism movement, and maybe it's good that we are witnessing all of this debauchery and nonsense happening now. We are seeing the consequences of removing this seemingly quaint, yet essential part of our mental makeup. Already the scales are shifting back. People are going back to church. Parents are getting more involved in their kids' schooling. People are rediscovering their culture, heritage, and faith through people like Jordan Peterson. Perhaps it was good then that we have this culture war, so that we can see just how important it is. and now that it's in living memory, I hope we don't forget it.